Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday evening space show program. I'm your host for the program, David Livingston. Thank you very much for tuning in. And our guest really needs no introduction, Jim Muncy. And he is with us on multiple really key, interesting, and important space topics that are going on in the nation right now. First, just a couple of really short, quick announcements. There is no program for Friday as I'm taking it off to do taxes with my bookkeeper. And Phil Swan, I'm surprised he's not with us, but maybe he'll join us in a few minutes. Phil is with us. His topic of choice is launching orbital data centers from the moon. He sent me that topic, so that's a quote from Phil. John Hunt is returning on the 17th. There has been a lot going on in the favorite topic of John and myself, UAP. I know that's not many of your favorite topics, but one of these days, some of you may find out that we've got a visitor in the space show audience and speaks a little bit of English. And if they use a picture like Sherry, that image could look like any of us, but then we wouldn't really know what they look like, right? But that might be a possibility. So we stay up to top on things with John Hunt. And then that much wanted program that I had to cancel for a variety of reasons on listeners requesting how space show people, like those of you in the room, use and play around with AI. That program is going to be on Sunday, March 22nd. But Jim Muncy is our guest of honor today. When we come close to the end of the program, I'll make the other announcements for sponsors and the fact that we're a listener-supported 501c3 program. But we're here to talk to Jim Muncy because he is current. He's in the middle of the Beltway. He has his pulse on what our fearless leaders in Congress and wherever else are cooking up for us and doing. And maybe taking us back to the moon with Artemis. Jim, why don't you start us out? Looks like Jared, our NASA administrator, might have been tweaking Artemis a little bit. What do you have to contribute on that story?
Well, I think a few weeks ago, he announced several significant changes to the near-term Artemis missions. Um, a lot of people, I think, mischaracterized it as canceling a lunar landing by moving Artemis 3 to low Earth orbit. But what he did was inserted a low Earth orbit rendezvous mission between Artemis 2 and the lunar landing. Uh, but more important than that is that he effectively canceled the exploration. He did cancel the exploration upper stage. Um, he canceled the second mobile launch platform um, and decided to standardize on a commercial upper stage, the Centaur 5 that ULA makes. And has flown 4 times successfully since Vulcan was entered into service a couple of years ago. Um, for a sort of common SLS version that will fly the Artemis 4 and 5 missions and any potential missions after that. He wants to accelerate the flight rate of the Artemis flights. Instead of once every 3 years, he wants them to fly in less than 1 year between between missions, uh, and get back to an operating cadence. In many ways, what he's done is challenge Boeing to say, show us that you can actually produce these on a streamlined um, and realistic tempo that will actually support the development of a lunar base. Personally, I still don't think that SLS is an affordable solution. Um, and that as soon as systems have demonstrated themselves capable of replacing SLS or supplanting SLS, that will happen. Um, the changes with, other than a little bit of media sniping, the changes seem to have been accepted with, almost, well, for the space community, semi-unanimous approval. The you know they haven't announced things that are probably going to, the next shoes that will drop, like Gateway will probably go away. Uh, if some of the elements of Gateway may be repurposed for the lunar surface, or for a different lunar orbiting space station or a different space station. Uh, but the real question is I think for the long term is how quickly does Starship and also New Glenn prove themselves capable of doing multiple rapid succession launches and propellant transfer to enable sending large things to the surface of the moon for cargo and crew. So that's those are the major changes he announced. He did it. He didn't do it in a negative way, uh, as a criticism to SLS or a criticism of the program or of the decisions that have been made before now. He simply said, um, if we're serious about going to the moon, we have to fly more often, more frequently. We need to standardize. We need to increase our cadence, um, and we need everyone rowing in the same direction. I was quoted by the New York Times in response to these as saying, "This is what competent NASA leadership looks like," and I mean that. He They seem to have lined up all their ducks before they went out and announced it. And then Jared did the sort of really broad media rollout strategy that I don't think I've seen from a NASA administrator in a long time, in terms of going to lots of different mainstream media um, venues and platforms to talk about what they were doing and why they were doing it. So he is being transparent. Um, he's focusing on actually delivering more results in space for the taxpayer. Uh, and while maximizing taxpayer results, because that can mean a lot of different things, may not be a perfect single point key parameter for space policy, it's a pretty damn good one. If we're actually getting more done in space rather than less done in space, and that more done in space is in line with the direction we've set as a country, that's probably good. And so that's I think was a necessary decision. Um, I started talking to people about replacing the exploration upper stage um, last summer, and talked about both a shortened version of New Glenn's upper stage uh, or Centaur 5 as being practical alternatives. Um, the reason they had to move to a new upper stage is, of course, they only made 3 of the ICPSs, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. That was a derivative of the Boeing Delta 4 uh, upper stage. And they made 3 of them, and then Boeing made ULA take the tooling apart so that they could only make 3, creating a forcing function for funding for the exploration upper stage, which frankly is just a really is a Delta 4 upper stage on steroids. It's just bigger.
Uh,
Um, and Boeing had gotten most of their high revenue per employee R&D money for EUS, but it looked like the cost of producing them was going to be outrageous as well. And I wish we had killed EUS earlier, but um, Jared waited until he had gathered information and that he made his decisions, and then he went about seriously rolling out and implementing those decisions. He clearly briefed the Hill ahead of time, um, and while one key person on the Hill did not publicly indicate support for the changes, everyone else did. And I thought it was good. It was a very good sign.
but
Um,
Jim, some of these changes, especially the mission changes, weren't they? Well, Jim Zimmerman on this show talked about doing an Earth orbital flight, and I think the National Safety Advisory Council said the same thing earlier this year. Am I remembering that correctly?
I saw an interview with Jared where he said that ASAP had recommended an interim mission as well. So I don't think Jared invented these ideas. I think what he did is he saw that the pace of missions was not going to work
Right.
for actually getting us to the moon anytime soon, and not going to work in terms of getting us to the moon on a sustainable basis, and said we're going to change.
Yeah.
And they changed a whole bunch of things at the same time. They added a mission. They standardized an upper stage on a commercially proven upper stage. Um, I think they've canceled the booster obsolescent life extension
You're right. They
contract
did.
on the solids.
They did.
Uh, so all of the things associated with SLS flying forever, I mean, the entire SLS 1D configuration was canceled. And instead they went to an SLS 1A configuration with the new upper stage, with the Centaur upper stage.
And I think
Uh,
Jared also said earlier that we would move to a lower cost alternative when it was available from
I
SLS.
believe he did say words to that effect.
Which
And
is good news.
if you look at the both the House passed the House Market Committee marked up a NASA authorization bill, which talks about on ramping commercial alternatives to SLS. I believe even the Senate bill has language to that effect, and a lot of the obnoxious language that the Senate bill had previously is gone. I have to commend NASA for doing a really good job of basically telling the Senate what would be helpful in a NASA authorization and what wouldn't. And you had strong efforts by many of the members of the Senate Commerce Committee to improve their bill and align it more with what Jared is pursuing. That said, there are decisions that don't have to be made now. You don't have to make the decision to turn off manufacturing of SLS cores today. You could. That's what the budget last year proposed. The budget proposed shutting down making SLS cores after Artemis 3. Then Chairman Cruz got $10 billion added to the Reconciliation Act that Congress passed last summer, and included in that was funding for an Artemis 4 and most of an Artemis 5 mission. And so the question would become, well, what's going to actually fly as an Artemis 4? And I think Jared understands that Artemis is not the launch vehicle used. Artemis is not the specific hardware that was previously manifested for a specific mission. he understands that what's critical is actually flying missions to get humans to the moon. And the program, the Artemis program or the Artemis strategy, is more important than any one hardware element. I was very encouraged by what he said about accelerating both of the HLS contractors. There is no longer any talk about a government lander as a replacement for the HLS program. He said that we're going to have NASA actually help both of the HLS companies to get their landers done sooner and better, and not just sort of sit back and wait for industry to ask for help. So they'll be more hands-on, but they're not going to be micromanaging. They're going to be assisting and offering expertise in areas to help them get it done, and perhaps take away some of the requirements that are not so important. One of the requirements that the Inspector General's report apparently talks about, because it was quoted in the Bloomberg story, is the issue of whether or not the astronauts on board the Starship HLS or the Blue Moon will have a tremendous amount of manual control of the vehicle in landing. And it was, speculated that SpaceX may be able to get a waiver of that astronaut desirement, which we all understand, since they're got their lives in their hands, and instead go ahead with an automated landing. Okay, since Starship will have done a lot of automated landings by then. Returning the Starship itself through the atmosphere back down to landing on Earth. The thing that always amazed me about the award to Starship in 2021, I understood that NASA really had no choice because it was by far the best technical solution. It wasn't exactly what NASA wanted. It was a lot more than what NASA wanted. But because SpaceX was developing Starship for other reasons, and they were putting billions of dollars into it of private money for other reasons, NASA got the benefit of all that investment in developing a system that would have the kind of flight rate and per flight costs that would be just amazing. But the architecture that NASA signed off on in giving Starship an award literally proved that every element of the canonical Artemis mission with Orion and SLS to the lunar orbit could be done by Starship. The only thing that wouldn't be included in the test program for NASA was flying people on Starship. But what do you think the odds are that Elon's going to fly people on Starship before they fly people, from lunar orbit down to the surface of the moon, fly astronauts?
Jim, let me jump in and ask you a sort of bottom line question for archive listeners who aren't as well informed and who aren't possibly specialists like most of the people in this room. Prior to these changes, most of us in this room, a lot of people out there, did not give very good odds that we would get to the moon with people in 2028. Probably would be a pretty low set of odds that they could do it.
Well, there were some loud public statements by former NASA administrators and other officials that was impossible.
And they were on the show.
I think there was skepticism. There was skepticism.
So my question to you is, now that Jared has implemented these changes and we have a different approach to some degree, what would you say the success rate, the success odds are for a 2028 landing? I'd like to know the improvement.
I was
That's
I
what-
was I was I was pleasantly surprised that Jared suggested that 2028 might allow for 2 landing attempts, one by one HLS system and one by the other HLS system. And that he hoped one could be done in early 2028 and another one could be done in late 2028 because of the increase in cadence of the SLS core. So you'd fly Orion and do an HLS rendezvous and another Orion and HLS rendezvous at the end of the year. I don't think it's going to get 2 shots on the moon in 2028, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get 1 shot at the moon with humans that could potentially land in calendar 2028. So I'd say the odds are pretty good.
Does anyone want to give us an odds number? Like, did it go from 20% to 80% chance of success? Anyone want to comment? A lot of you guys are really well up on the engineering and what's going on. I'd love to know the improvement range and the odds. And I think listeners that aren't so tied into the specifics that we've been talking about, that'd be a nice bottom line number to sort of associate with the new plan.
Well, if we couldn't get there by 2028 with Artemis 3, how do we get there by 2028 with Artemis 4 without a change in the hardware that's being used to do that? Given that
it does seem that it's all about risk reduction, right? I mean, this reconfiguration of Artemis 3 is a much needed risk reduction.
Right.
But it does insert another Artemis before you get to the moon.
And that is the bottleneck.
The inserted Artemis can't happen any earlier than Artemis 3 was going to happen anyway. So it really represents a delay, I think.
I disagree with that. The requirement, you don't have a requirement for cryogenic propellant transfer in rapid succession to enable sending an HLS to the lunar vicinity for the new Artemis 3 mission, because it's in low Earth orbit. All you have to do is launch the ASLS prototype and go ahead and do a rendezvous and a test docking and stuff like that in Earth orbit. It's a much easier mission than Artemis 3 was going to be, even if you forget the landing. It's easier than doing it at the moon. So if they can't speed up the SLS core to fly in, early to mid 2027, after this Artemis 2 mission in the next couple months, then we have a bigger problem.
Right.
Okay. And what he's saying is, I want to accelerate the rate of SLS cores flying to 1 a year and then less than 1 a year.
Yeah, but
so we have most of the Artemis 3 hardware already, right? It's sitting over at Michaud right now.
But do we have Artemis 4 hardware?
We have some of it.
Yeah.
Right? And we have 2 years to get it here. So, I think actually...
But you're talking about the core, okay?
Yeah.
They can make a core and they can make boosters and do all that. They have the hardware. They have the engines. For the cores. The issue is whether or not they'll have the landers and have the spacesuit. And I think by giving both companies a chance to do a lander demonstration in low Earth orbit in mid 2027, that increases the likelihood. Now, if they can't do that, if neither HLS company is able, if there's still the pacing issue for a 2027 flight, for a mid 2027 flight, and it slips to late 2027, then I would say we're back to 50-50 or maybe 60-40 on whether we do a landing the next year.
Right.
I think this is like a case of SLS is sort of slowing down and grabbing the hand of the commercial providers like Blue Origin and SpaceX to help them catch up and de-risk their programs. But it fundamentally doesn't address the long pole in the tent, which is the HLS systems, right? Those are the parts that are very much delayed and are going to stop us getting there in time. And I suppose the spacesuits as well. So I feel like we're slowing down SLS to sort of align it with the HLS, but we're not actually doing anything about the HLS programs themselves. So we're not actually going to improve the schedule.
I don't think we're slowing down SLS. We're speeding up SLS. We're just using a fourth one instead of a third one for the landing.
Right.
I mean, they very much want to speed up by standardizing, to the Centaur 5. They want to speed up the dates at which they get the Artemis 4 core and the Artemis 5 core. They want to get both of those available to fly in 2028. I don't think SLS, unless SLS can't be accelerated, which is a bigger problem, like I said, I think they'll be ready in 2028. The question is,
SLS doesn't need to be accelerated. SLS is on time. It's not the problem. The problem is the human landing systems, as you said a few minutes ago.
Well, do you think that flying an SLS every 3 years is a sustainable program?
Well, they clearly can fly them more often if they want to. Like if HLS was ready, they could fly SLS much faster than every 3 years. I don't think the issue is that the issue seems to be that when they fly them every 3 years, when they wait so long between flights, they seem to have more problems with things like hydrogen leaks and helium leaks. Because, like as Jared said, the people who are on staff get out of practice when they're launching them so infrequently, and there's probably a lot more cost and overhead and wasted overhead if they're only flying them that infrequently. So yes, increasing the pace would probably lower the cost per flight and make each individual flight more reliable, but it won't necessarily speed up the date which we land people on the moon.
It doesn't. I agree. I do think the insertion of a new mission increases the likelihood of getting to the moon in the same calendar time frame, because we're de-risking the whole process.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I also think that adding an HLS milestone, a flight milestone for one or both companies in 2027 is an important way to goose them along and accelerate them. So their deadline isn't like 3 years away too, or 2 or 3 years away too.
Well,
the more we can get people focused on shorter deadlines,
right,
that focus the mind, the better off we'll be.
well, the HLS folks still have to build an additional lander to do the Earth orbit mission and the demonstration landing mission before the crew goes down to the moon.
Yeah, but these companies are able to build hardware really fast.
Well, one of them is. I don't know about the other one.
I'm going to give Blue. I work for one of the companies. I'm going to give the other company the benefit of the doubt.
I would like to see them speed up. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they're going to speed up enough for that.
I think trying to get both landers into a Earth orbiter configuration earlier is a brilliant move to move those programs forward. And I'm not sure why we thought that the big problem here was the in-orbit refueling, because I actually think that's going to go better than people think. But it is much simpler to do this in Earth orbit, and especially if you're testing a life support system. Like, let's test the life support system in Earth orbit. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly think that I actually lost my point. I certainly hope that with serious efforts by Jared to try to reach out to both HLS companies, I agree with you about the propellant transfer not being the propellant transfer that SpaceX is doing is with methane. That is easier. I'm looking at Dallas and the old methane depot guy. I don't think that's the issue. The issue for SpaceX has always been 100% reusability. It's harder it's not necessary to actually do the Artemis landing mission. Okay? It's more expensive to throw away, to launch an expendable Starship that actually delivers more propellant to your depot, okay, or your tanker or whatever it is. Or your, I guess it could be your HLS in orbit.
Yeah, I've always thought that was the backup plan if they couldn't get complete reusability of Starship to work in time.
But importantly, SpaceX has other reasons for full reusability. And rather and those reasons have to do with a $1 trillion+ IPO that's coming up at some point in the next several months. I have absolutely no information about when it's happening.
They can't just land on the moon and say we've done it. They have to land and go back up to the NRHO to demonstrate the mission will work the way they intend it to work.
Right.
So,
I thought we were getting rid of NRHO.
Yeah.
Well, there's talk. There's talk. I saw a couple of papers this week, or an article this week about people looking at other orbits that Orion can get into and get out of. That's the issue. What can Orion do?
Especially with a Centaur.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it's not the Centaur. It is the ESA stage, the service module.
The service module stage is...
Hey, Jim, another quick political question for you. We do have international partners, again, committing to the Gateway that we're probably going to sort of screw like we did years ago. Explain it.
I don't accept that statement.
Okay, explain it.
I think everyone who was contributing hardware to the Gateway in the hope of one day getting an astronaut to look down at the lunar surface from lunar orbit will be thrilled if they actually get a sooner chance at landing someone on the surface.
So their commitment and expenses and hours invested into Gateway hardware, they just write off?
If they still get the benefit, the bartered benefit that NASA was going to provide them, and it's a better benefit, like actually getting to the lunar surface, I don't see anyone likely to scream.
Yeah, I mean,
we're not talking about adding a new partner that totally throws up the ISS, the Space Station Freedom program into a tizzy. Okay, when we added Russia, we're talking about making it more likely to get more people to the surface of the moon with the same amount of money and the same amount of time over the long haul, which means they get surface flights. And they weren't going to get a surface flight before. I don't know how much the UAE is investing in their hardware for the Gateway, okay? But I'm pretty sure NASA didn't promise them a surface mission for it.
Yeah.
Or Italy.
Okay.
I've also seen some stuff about maybe some of that hardware might be reused on the surface.
There's been I'm not an engineer, okay?
Although I don't know.
I don't know what hardware can and can't be reused on the surface.
It seems to me that ESA, United UAE, they were all building things for habitation. All of those could be used on the surface, could be modified slightly. The only one there out of the 6 or 7 who are building things, the only one which will have a little problem is the Canada arm. The Canada arm was supposed to be for Gateway. Now that's likely probably not going to be quite applicable. But all others, Japan, ESA, UAE, all of them can be remodified, slightly modified maybe, to be used on the gateway on the surface.
Well, I don't know, for example, whether Redwire's solar arrays can work in 1/6G the way they could work in 0G as gateway. I don't know if they're going to be capable of standing up to lunar dust and stuff like that on the surface, or rocket plumes and things like that. So some of the hardware that's been done contractually for NASA, or that's been developed or that's being developed internationally, may have to change. But the point is that we had the gateway because we needed some place for Artemis to go before Trump put the lunar surface back into the program in 2017. Gateway existed because we had to have some place for Orion to go.
Right, and Orion needs support to be around the moon as long as 30 days, for beyond 10 days. It can't live on its own. It has to be supported by the gateway to stay there for longer periods. Plus, the gateway can be put in a better orbit if we have a better performing way to get to the moon and not go into the NRHO. So those things can still be used in the future.
So I don't think we should make space policy based on the sunk cost fallacy. That because we built hardware, some of which may not be usable, means we have to stay on the same course.
That wasn't my point. My point is
no. I'm not saying that was your point. I'm saying that to all the people, most notably a certain former NASA administrator who fixate on lobbying for Gateway. I don't think we want our policy to be constrained by what we spent money on for hardware. I mean, we've just spent how many $1 billion on EUS? And we're canceling it because that's the right thing to do, to lower the cost of SLS missions for as long as we have to use SLS, hopefully not more than a few more times.
Yeah.
But the money we've spent on EUS up until this point is gone. To use the fact that we did spend money on it to twerk us around to keep on that same path is insanity.
Right.
And I think exactly the same way about Gateway. I mean, I went into Bill Gerstenmaier's office when he was still AA back in the 2010s, okay, with a pal of mine. And we did this with OMB's full knowledge and I won't say at their request, but with their full knowledge, to argue for a synergistic effort to do commercial station hardware, station infrastructure that could be used for both ISS replacement and as a destination for Orion in lunar orbit. We did not specify the NRHO, which I like to call the Special Olympics orbit, because that's what the service module can get out of. And we made that argument, and his response was too soon. But sure enough, a couple years later, there was Gateway. But was it done in a way that actually linked up and reduced risk for commercial LEO destinations? No, it was not. And so we have truly commercial hardware being developed for low Earth orbit, and we have, the government stuff out at Gateway. So
and bartered at that.
Yes, bartered at that, and it's literally ISS in lunar orbit.
So,
which is not what we need.
That
sets us up for my next topic.
Well, I was just going to say, we get to the surface of the moon. What actually is our lunar-based strategy?
So, what I'm going to talk about is issues that the March Storm citizens lobbyists are going to be talking about on the Hill next week. The space superiority executive order that the president signed in December set the goal of establishing initial elements of a permanent lunar outpost by 2030. But it also talks about laying the foundations for lunar economic development, and it includes a first preference for commercial solutions. The foundation, the Space Frontier Foundation, has been, and that's who I'm representing here, has been, on the Hill for the last year, talking about the fact that we're not racing China to get to the moon. We're racing against China on the moon. We're racing against China to utilize the moon and develop the moon and settle the moon, in our view. And that is a fundamentally economic and fundamentally a commercially focused activity. So we argue that our lunar presence should therefore be commercially focused, because commercial companies do economic development better than government programs. And what we're talking about is literally economically developing the surface of the moon. Jared has a wonderful phrase he uses. He talks about cracking the code of space business. How do you figure out the value proposition of being in low Earth orbit, of humans in low Earth orbit? How do you figure out the value proposition of being on the moon? How do you figure out the value proposition of other activities in space that generate a significant economic return, not spinoffs, not multiplier effect from government spending, but actual real commercial activity that with sustainable revenue and growth, so that you can offset the need to spend entirely tax dollars on civil space activities. And really our job on the moon is to crack the code. What can we do on the moon to make money? And I'm if that sounds crass and commercial and ultra capitalist or whatever, so be it. There is of course science to be done on the moon, but it's better to do science using affordable commercial capabilities and commercial infrastructure than doing it with bespoke government systems. So our view is that the lunar base should be commercial from day one. Okay. That if you look at how we're doing low Earth orbit, and really how we've done human spaceflight up until this point, we had a space shuttle, which we developed and spent a lot of money on. And there were attempts to, quote, commercialize it or privatize it back in the late 1990s. And there were even discussions of flying commercial missions with it up until the Columbia tragedy. After that, there was no more discussion of it. It turns out that the systems NASA develops for operations in space aren't easily commercializable or privatizable, because they were never designed in the first place for low-cost operation, for easy economic scaling, or any of those things, okay? All the wonderful Klaus Heiss predictions about numbers of flights per year and how the shuttle would be done in an aircraft-like way, and we would have regular flights and all that stuff wasn't what NASA got from Richard Nixon's Office of Management and Budget to develop the shuttle. They developed a prototype system, a magical system that people were heroes to fly on, and NASA made the impossible look regular, but it was still impossible. It was still a very risky activity, and 14 people died in that program.
They were locked. They were locked into one particularly frozen into a particular prototype indefinitely, and no evolution.
And there was no real way to evolve because the cost of operating the prototype precluded serious efforts at adding to it. And then NASA had multiple failures at efforts at coming up with a bespoke replacement for the shuttle, which of course they couldn't afford while operating the shuttle. Now, fast forward to space station. We have a space station that has had some commercial utilization thanks to nanoracks and now thanks to Axiom, but it's not set up for commercial activity. It's not privatizable. I'm not aware of any companies proposing to buy ISS or take over ISS and operate it more cheaply and make it work. The hardware wasn't designed for it. The hardware is old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing we should want on the moon is to go down the road of a bespoke NASA lunar base that is designed by government people for government use, with no thought to the commercial utilization of it. And then this notion that, well, NASA will just abandon it in place when they go off to Mars. Okay? But I've heard NASA people say that's their plan for 2 decades. Okay? That's nonsense. The lunar base has to be commercial from day one. And the way to do that is to instead of having the intergovernmental agreement structure that built the ISS or managed the ISS program, is we need a level of indirection from the government. The government needs to send, the US government needs to send its representatives and other nations that are going to be involved in the lunar base who put up money, okay, who contribute significant hardware and money. They can be part of a port authority for the moon. And that port authority for the moon will oversee the economic development of the moon by the partners who are in that authority.
How do we maximize the breadth of the possible on-ramps for economic activity in the development of the fundamentals?
What we do is we charter the authority with the express mandate of maximizing the number of users on the moon, of continuing of on-ramping every possible low-cost supplier of a capability for lunar activity, and so that there are no locked in, contracts where you have to go with one company forever doing, the power system on the moon. And you certainly don't want the government designing the power system on the moon. But you want, I said this in my last space show appearance. What we need to be doing is we need to be, as quickly as possible, trying as many economic experiments at locations in space we want to go to as quickly as possible. We want this. The ISS was not set up for American entrepreneurs to do hundreds of economic experiments at the same time on ISS. Okay? And to rapidly tweak their experiment and improve it to generate more revenue. Okay? There have been some outstanding apparent successes in ISS research that could lead to valuable medical products and other things, but they happen just by the sheer determination of getting through the process and getting through the bureaucracy. Nanoracks worked because they hired their own technical engineers to basically push back on Boeing's safety process for ISS payloads. And they wouldn't agree to paying the cost that Boeing wanted to charge or wanted NASA to charge for them to review the safety of small commercial payloads going to ISS. And that's why Nanoracks was able to get more hardware and more activity up there than literally any other entity other than NASA itself. And I mean, the lion's share of their early commercial successes were thanks to Nanoracks.
Jim,
and Axiom having 5 commercial human missions to ISS is obviously a huge success, and that's joining them with the 6th mission next year.
What is the level of support in Congress for your idea, for what you're talking about right now?
We're going to find out next week.
So you don't have any prelim level of support or roadblocks coming up or anything like that?
Well, I'll give you a good indicator. The draft NASA authorization bill that staff of the Senate Commerce Committee released a few weeks ago had language about how a lunar base absolutely requires the unique expertise of the government to design it and set it up and manage it. So that language is not in the version that they reported out of committee last week.
So Jim, add one more thing to your magazine of bullets when you talk to them, and that is every infrastructure item on the moon and transportation to the moon should be a purchased service. Habitation, spacesuits are, LTV is, habitation should be, power should be. All of those should be commercially available or provided commercially, that NASA can buy them and others can buy them. I mean, why have a habitat on the moon sit empty for 11 months if it's only a U.S. habitat? You know, let other people use it, but the only way to do that is to have a commercially provided.
Right. No, but the authority acting on behalf of the partners can buy a habitat and then rent it out to the partners, space agencies, or to private entities as they see fit.
Yes.
Now, in fact, you probably won't have the authority due to day-to-day management on the moon. You'll probably have some sort of government corporation do that. But you want to make sure that the authority isn't competing with the users or suppliers of the lunar base. You do not want the governments, even acting collectively, to be competing with the people who want to use it. Now, NASA wants to have a surface nuclear power source, okay? That could be a government facility. NASA can design that facility if it wants to. And there will be a NASA facility there amidst all the commercial infrastructure. And the astronauts will go from their commercially provided habitat to their nuclear power system and assemble it and build it and test it and you know, and that power can feed into the to the quote lunar grid, whatever that is. Okay, but and there may be scientific activities that are appropriate. I don't think they're ever really appropriate for totally bespoke systems, but for government operation, okay, where you have, or government funded scientists are using a telescope or whatever, or doing geology. But most of it can be commercially developed and commercially provided on a fixed price basis with the governments as customers to put together their own program. I would literally give my left hand if I could get NASA to exclusively focus on what it is they want astronauts to actually do on the moon, where operating infrastructure is not one of the allowed answers.
In other words, why do they actually want to have human beings on the moon? Not because they're worried about Chinese taikonauts on the moon. That's a good reason, but that's not a sustainable reason.
Right.
Okay. What do they want to do on the moon? What is the public sector value proposition for human beings on the moon? I assume that there are lots of things that smart people at NASA have ideas for to do on the moon. Some of them are science, some of them are engineering, some of them are technology demonstrations, some of them, I don't know. I'm not the scientist here, but I am enough of I'm not even a political scientist, so I don't know what the frack I am, but a degenerate former math major. But I know that if we could focus on what the actual outputs of lunar exploration are, that is worth the public spending the money on, and we maximize for those outputs, then the systems that actually enable that, the infrastructure, the services, all the things that we've been talking about, that Dallas mentioned, they will be cheaper and we will get more units of output per dollar we spend doing it. Because that's the way markets work, that's the way economies work, etc. And I think it's entirely possible that we could start the lunar base on the right course from the beginning. Now, NASA's already thinking about what hardware they want to put on the moon, okay? Because that's what they do. They just come up with hardware projects to go do phase A studies of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of aerospace companies trying to sell NASA studies of stuff to do on the moon now that we have a lunar base program. But if we can get them torqued over to focusing on actual results and specifying requirements for infrastructure, for requirements for capabilities, as opposed to technical design issues of habitats and things like that. I mean, yes, cosmic ray shielding is an issue, and yes, micrometeoroid debris is probably a bigger issue on the lunar surface than it is in low Earth orbit. But I don't see how a habitat on the surface of the moon is that much harder than in low Earth orbit, or Eclipse is that much harder on the moon than it is in low Earth orbit. And we're about to embrace totally commercial systems in low Earth orbit. If we're doing that, why don't we start out the moon base the right way?
And I've asked my former Boeing manager if they would consider doing that, providing a habitat on their dime for commercial use.
And I suspect their answer was no.
They haven't gotten back to me yet.
Well, they've made some public statements about not wanting to do fixed price contracts anymore. So I'm assuming that falls into the category of.
Well,
I guess they could rent it out to somebody, huh? Is that the idea? That they would create it and they'd rent it to various customers, whether government or private.
Right. But fixed price contracts is one thing. Speculating with your own money to put up a building that others might rent is an entirely different animal. More risky.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's useful to have the authority as sort of a market maker. The authority can know what all the individual partners want to do. Okay? It can take in that confidential information, the strategic information from all the international partners. And by the way, there's nothing stopping a big company that wants to be a dominant presence on the moon from being a quote part of the authority as well.
But as long as if you have that sort of market making and regulatory entity on top, then you can go and say, based on your knowledge of all the users on the moon, what's the demand level going to be for habitable volume on the lunar surface with standard eclipse and standard power and standard other things. And they will have an idea of what it's going to be, because they'll be talking to all the people that are likely to actually buy these capabilities.
So, Jim, I have a reality check question to ask you. So
please,
hopefully you can educate me genuinely, that I do mean that. I interview and talk to lots and lots of academic people that claim to have interest in the moon and in this science, and they don't talk like we do. And they don't see commerce as what they want on the moon. In fact, they see commerce as probably a threat to what they want to do on the moon. And they also talk to NASA, and NASA is supposed to, I guess, represent somewhat equally all American taxpayers and citizens. So that I see this huge gap in different parts of the community that have a lunar interest, be it scientific or academic or commercial, like all of us are talking about here today, that really isn't being bridged. So how do these special interests, I guess that's the wording I'm going to use, get sorted out by NASA? And how is it compromised out, or is it compromised out? Because I guess they do have a genuine interest in how they want to see lunar development go, and why shouldn't they, even though it's not my interest? Help me out on this.
Well, I'm tempted to quote a famous politician who I had the honor of working for 40 years ago, named Ronald Reagan, who said, my plan for the Soviet Union is that we win and they lose. I care about science getting done on the moon. I don't care about scientists having a socialist playground on the moon. Okay?
Correct.
I think it is certainly arguable and probably analyzed up proof by analysis that a commercial approach will have more human beings living on the surface of the moon and more power and more habitable volume and more of all the capabilities you need than a all government approach. Okay? If only because later this year, roughly $50 billion in investment capital that employees and early investors in SpaceX, have in their hands right now will become publicly tradable stock, and they will be able to take that money and go use it for another investment. $50 billion is 3 times NASA's procurement budget. It's twice their overall budget, but it's 3 times their procurement budget. Okay? That's a lot of money for companies who tend to spend money more efficiently than NASA to go invest in things, including commercial lunar activities. Okay? It's not all going to go to the moon, but some fraction of it will go to the moon. Okay? If you have a socialist paradise on the moon, none of that money goes to the moon. So if it's 10 billion, 15 billion, whatever it is, that's now added to whatever NASA can spend on lunar hardware, we're going to have a dramatically faster, better, more population, more capability lunar base than we would otherwise. Okay? And science will have a substantial fraction of that. Okay? and the National Science Foundation and the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Geological Service, and NOAA and other people will actually be able to fund research that can be done by scientists on the surface of the moon as a, science as a service commercial activity on the moon. So I mean, we're already seeing privately funded space telescopes being built. Okay. I saw a story that one where the company is going to have a primary reflecting mirror bigger than Hubble's.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no reason why scientists can't coexist with evil entrepreneurs on the surface of the moon. I don't want to ruin the lunar far side radio. I think we need to find ways to make sure that they can do, some radio astronomy on the lunar far side and some other things. But I do not go into this assumption that commerce is bad for science. Lewis and Clark led one of the greatest scientific expeditions ever, but the legislation that passed the funding for that bill was to promote the external commerce of the United States. And they sure as hell figured out where the navigational points were, where the resources were, where new plants and species were, and all sorts of things that were useful to America, putting all that new territory to profitable use. There is not an inherent conflict between science and commerce. It's only scientists who don't want there to be any commerce at all is the problem.
And resident scientists can do more science than visiting scientists.
I mean, I see no reason. I mean, if we have monthly Starship flights to the moon, okay? Just to start with, okay? Why wouldn't we have dozens of people living on the moon, a few of which could be scientists? I can make room in my vision for them. Why can't they expand their vision to include me? That's why I say I win, they lose.
Well, the other thing is, in the presence of infrastructure, like assuming there is a reason for there to be infrastructure, then science becomes the NSF writing a grant, like any other scientific enterprise is. And you say, oh, well, you need to get this much hardware to the moon. There's a way to do that. There's a place to put it. And then you do your thing, right? And we write you a grant, and you have a principal investigator, and you do that for 3 years or something, right? The problem, I think, scientists, and we had one on this show recently, is they think we're not spending enough money on science because we're doing all this other stuff. However, they don't say like, oh yeah, we can't build, it's a bad thing to build roads in Australia, even though we use them to put the telescope in Australia that the scientists use, right? We don't have that dichotomy anywhere else. We have it in space because they're fighting for a limited pool of funds, and they think doing this commercial thing means you can't do any science thing.
Well, let me
which is a NASA problem, right? That's a NASA budget problem.
I understand that, and I of course think that long term that's a fruitless argument, because what you need to do is you need to grow the total resource base, and you grow the total resource base by get all this private investment coming in that lowers the cost of actually getting to the moon and doing things on the moon, so that the science budget goes further than it would go otherwise. But there is one valid complaint that scientists have. Well, there may be multiple valid complaints, but there's one really valid complaint that the scientists have. people like Norm Augustine's commission back in the 90s and elsewhere have created this idea that the reason we're going into space is science. Okay, that's not true. The reason we're going into space is because we want to expand human civilization into space. Now, they may not want to expand human civilization into space, but we do. And we know that human civilization includes science, a lot of it, okay? Because that's how civilization advances. So we now, when they're told that they are the reason for going into space, and then the engineering program at NASA shortchanges the science over and over and over again because of problems with the engineering program, and you take money away from the science to fund the hardware, I would be upset if I were a scientist too. It's like you're the fig leaf for the NASA socialist engineering program, and you're only brought out at the congressional hearings to say, we need the space station because of all this great research we're going to do. Okay, somewhere in Alabama or someplace, Larry DeLucas is off doing real things with his life and not doing scientific microgravity research on the space station. Okay, but for like 10 years, Larry was the evangelist for the ISS and space station freedom. I would rather the scientists be in charge of their own budget and not just be a fig leaf for the engineering program. I want to take the money away from this NASA engineering program. I want the scientists to be funded to use the commercial infrastructure that's developed. And I don't know if scientists can, believe that or not, but they've been lied to for so long. I understand that they're skeptical. I can understand their skepticism. I can't understand, or I can't accept their antipathy towards commerce.
One more thing, listeners, as well as those in the room with us, we're 15 minutes out from a 90-minute program. So if you have additional topics, questions, or comments that you want to put to Jim, you should do it now rather than hold your tongue, because time is a-moving. So it's out there for anyone to join in the conversation and participate. Marshall?
I'd like to ask a question. Who's going to design the first lunar modules that people are going to live in on the moon? Because the way they do that is probably going to be what determines a lot of the infrastructure, and in turn, the cost of housing a person on the moon, I guess, would be per month.
I don't know the answer to that question. I would hope we would have a process where multiple companies that are interested in providing infrastructure on the surface of the moon, or habitable volume, whatever, habitation support on the moon, would come up with their ideas. Right. Okay? And that, for example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology can work with NASA and with industry to come up with some starting assumptions for what things should be able to do, or what, I don't want to say what things should look like, but key features that we want to standardize initially. Okay, and then we'll see whether that works or not. Okay, things can change and be amended over time and improved over time. But if we want the first few modules to have some common elements, some common hatches, some common power attachments, some common other things, let's foster just discussion within industry and with the government to figure out how to do that. We do that in the internet. We do that in other high tech areas. where different providers work together and create standards so that their systems are somewhat interoperable. We should be able to do that on the moon.
And there's organizations
for the moon, not on the moon,
that are doing that, and that's confers, number one. They're creating standards for satellite servicing and in-space assembly manufacturing that can be extended to the moon very easily in their charter. So, and there
could be, and one thing I would want is I would like it if we could give whatever entity is going to do this some antitrust exemption that allows companies to talk together about some of their design ideas and their things, so that it's not like, as long as everyone gets to participate in it, and as long as the methods are fully shared with all industry, I would like, I mean, literally, I mean, most standards organizations that I'm aware of have to get some sort of antitrust exemption to actually, so that they're not engaging in some sort of collusion amongst industry to do one thing that hurts somebody else. I mean, that we have a pretty litigious society. So,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to the Artemis revamp, so to speak. Is New Glenn or Blue Origin thinking of Mark 1.5 for their lunar HLS? And if so,
there have been public reports that they were looking at doing a simplified version of the Blue Moon Mark II that would have less capability than the full up Mark II, that they could do sooner and faster. If you know, I do, their ideas are proprietary to them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what SpaceX's acceleration options are. I just think we want a NASA working as a true partner with both companies to help both of them go as fast as they can. And I think it makes sense for Blue Origin to propose a less fully capable system. I mean, if there's one thing SpaceX should have taught everyone, is that you never treat your first piece of hardware as perfect, and you never plan to just have one design. Is you try something, and you try a series of things to get you to an initial capability that works. But then you immediately start figuring out, how can we improve it? How can we improve it? How can we improve it? And you keep putting yourself out of business. And you know, I'm not involved anymore, but I used to be very involved in the launch regulation issues with FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And for a long time, FAA was complaining that SpaceX kept changing their rocket. Well, the FAA wasn't supposed to be judging the internals of the rocket. They were simply supposed to be judging whether, if the rocket failed, it would hurt someone. Okay? But they wanted to try to get some sort of general understanding of the rocket, and SpaceX kept changing it. And it was too fast for the FAA to keep up. Well, sorry. You know, I mean, what is it? We currently call it the Falcon 9 full thrust. Is that what we call it now? I mean, what the latest version is? I know there was a Block 5 in there and then other things, but whatever the version is now, we're not making no one's making lots of changes to Falcon 9, but we are flying it 150 times a year, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of, let's say that it is 1.5, Mark 1.5, whatever it is going to be called, that actually goes to some orbit around Luna, and then it will join rendezvous with Orion and land, transfer the astronauts and land. Is that kind of the idea here? And if that is the case,
okay, I don't speak for Blue Origin. I don't know what they're planning to do. Okay, it may be that they have a Blue Moon Mark 1.3 that they try in low Earth orbit, and then they will have developed enough of the capabilities of Blue Moon to call it Mark 1.6 when they do the first actual mission landing on the moon. Okay, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that they believe in iterative design, iterative improvement, iterative, so that there'll be a certain level of capability in their lander vehicle that works in low Earth orbit, and it will have more stuff added to it when it does its demonstration mission of landing on the moon, and then it may have, even further stuff added to it for the actual lunar landing. I wouldn't be surprised if those are three somewhat different vehicles.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, just because they'll have more time, to do the one in, that goes to the moon as a demonstration and then goes to the moon as an actual landing. Now they may make those last two identical just so that NASA has the confidence of the of the Artemis 4 version being, or Artemis 5 version being exactly like their proof mission, their demonstration mission. Fine.
Yeah. Do you have any opinion on which one would be first? In other words, which one would be Artemis 4? Would it be Blue? Or do you think it would be Artemis 5 would be SpaceX?
I think the genius of what Jared has done is that he has made it instead of making it a sort of fake race with a finish line way off in the distance, he's made it a race with mid 2027 as the finish line in low Earth orbit. Okay, and I hope both of them succeed for that mission, so that they both get demonstrated in that mission. But if you think I'm going to pick which one actually gets us to the moon first, you're crazy.
Wouldn't it be great?
I'm just asking for your opinion.
Personally, I think because SpaceX started first and because SpaceX has done so much work, I think SpaceX is likely to succeed first. But, I'm not picking favorites here. I think the great thing is we have two companies, okay, and they're both hard at work, and they're both going to have a near-term milestone to shoot for, and they're both going to, have additional help to get to the vicinity of the moon as soon as possible.
Well, my guess is that Blue Moon will be first, actually, but you don't have to say that, or you don't have to agree with that, but this is my opinion.
I think it's going to be a lot more fun to watch the program now than as it was 2 months ago.
Absolutely.
Jim, I have a final question for you
Please.
One segment.
You're looking like the emperor there in your dark t-shirt, and you sort of look like,
It says a space show on it, but there's one other interest group that talks about the moon really subtly, and I just pick your brain on this. What's the interest of the military and weaponization in developing the moon?
I think that an authority structure for developing the moon would allow for government agencies that wish to engage in non-kinetic activities on the moon that have a national security benefit could do that. Let's just say the Space Force has a long way to go.
Yeah.
Anybody have a closing question or comment for Jim, or something they want to say to the audience at large?
Quick question for Jim. Thinking about the initial commercial activity, and do you see a path going from some of these early lunar outposts to the development of, say, manufacturing for orbital data centers? Is that something you can envision?
So what I want is for as many entrepreneurs to be able to try out their ideas on the moon, including competing with Earth-launched computer hardware, to create those orbital data centers. I don't know anything about orbital data centers or data centers even, okay? I mean, I know less than paper thin information about these things, okay? I do know that people on the ground don't like the noise the data centers make. I do think it's been kind of phony that data centers are somehow negative impacts on the power grid and stuff like that, because smart data centers are being built with supplemental power generation capacity themselves. I read recently something about an issue with, if data centers go offline, the utilities have to scramble to make up for the fact that the pull, the draw on the current isn't what it was, and they have to literally reshuffle, how much they're producing so they don't like fry all the circuits. And no, I don't know what anything I just said, whether that's technically accurate or not. So I have always thought that in the long term, it would make more sense to use in situ materials in space to manufacture really big things in space, whether that's space colonies, Lagrange point colonies, or really big solar power satellites or other things. Okay. I was working for SSI, the Space Studies Institute, when they did a study back in the 80s, and showed that over 99% of the material, that if you took the canonical NASA DOE design for a space solar power satellite, initially they thought you could make 95% of it with lunar materials. They then did an assessment of, if you optimized it for the design somewhat for the use of lunar materials, you could make 99% of it from lunar materials. So if we can develop the kind of active, dynamic, thriving industrial presence on the moon that does that, and it's going to be cheaper than launching them from the Earth, great. I want the market to win.
I think
really
you just described. Yeah, I think you just described the challenge that I see with it. It's just hard to go from no infrastructure on the moon to being able to produce these,
but what I would really like, products. What I would really like is to have a big enough, dynamic enough, and the breadth of activity on the lunar surface so that somebody could try.
Right.
Yeah, we'll have to find a way to make baby steps
to compete with data centers launched from the surface. That would be, I would be thrilled that we really were doing the moon seriously if somebody got to try. What I don't want is to have some piddly ass miniature ISS on the surface of the moon where no one gets to actually do the economic experiments on the moon to figure out whether you can make money, because it's all, excuse my word, chicken shit. Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody listen to Phil's program on a related topic this Sunday. So, any other comments or questions any concluding comments from you, Jim?
I'm thrilled. I hope that we get some positive responses from the Hill next week. And I, anything folks can do to sort of evangelize for the idea of a commercial lunar base would be great. Feel free to email me. I think my email address is somewhere in your files, David, or on the show.
Yeah.
And love to work with you, love to promote it. And of course, everyone should go to spacefrontier.org and sign up and give us money and all that stuff.
Can I ask one last question? Bhavya Lal and other people have written recently an article saying that for nuclear power, go big or go home. So they are saying that you probably need something of the order of at least 1 megawatt or more. And I think this sort of fits into your commercialization plan.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, so then ELSIC at one time was kind of discussing the idea of let's say if NASA was to create a fission power station there to sell the electricity to commercial entities and stuff.
What I want is for NASA and the electric power industry or the nuclear electric power industry to partner to develop capabilities on the moon, and ideally more than one. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the commercial companies to operate the systems they develop and hopefully add to them and improve on them, with their own money based on the lunar demand for power.
Yeah.
I don't want NASA to be in the utility business.
I don't think
that is a recipe for death.
I don't think one can afford nuclear energy on the moon, given the way it's been talked about today.
Who cannot afford it?
Then maybe it should be done correctly.
Triple digit dollars per kilowatt hour is my assessment.
Yeah.
Well,
and what's just out of curiosity, what is with the latest high performance, low weight solar panels that people are talking about, what's the equivalent number for solar energy on the moon?
It's probably going to be about the same if you need to operate 24/7.
Well, what about with batteries and
that includes the batteries and stuff? Yeah.
Okay.
So there are other technologies out there to be explored to bring that cost down.
Well, what about beam power from a Lagrange point or something like that?
That's possible. You lose about 75% of it in the transmission and reconversion process. Yep.
Nah.
Lasers are 50% efficient from electricity. Solar cells are 50% efficient if they're tuned to the wavelength. So that's 25% of what you generate.
I would love to see what some of these new commercial space solar power companies could do in the environment around the moon and what they could, come up with in terms of lower cost ways of doing things. Be interesting.
Yeah.
But those are exactly the sort of things we want to create opportunities for companies like that to get into business.
Yeah.
Well, 1 kilogram of thorium, which is plentiful on the moon, will create 1 megawatt reactor for 1 year. 1 megawatt reactor, 1 kilogram of thorium, which is already on the moon, but even if you can take it from here, it's not a big deal.
But you need to wrap a reactor around it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, but it's about 8,000. It's about 2,000, 1,000 kilograms total.
Okay.
Weight.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciated talking to you and answering all these rapid fire, scintillating questions. I'll try to come back for that AI one and listen, because I would like to know what the hell to do with this AI stuff.
Right.
I'll send you the invitation.
Thank you, sir.
So
Thanks, David.
invitation. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Back again on Sunday. That's our next live program. Everybody have a great week. Keep looking
Take
up.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank
Goodbye,
you.
all.
Thank you, Jim, for coming.